The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation, and welcoming today for the second time, Sabrina Johnson, the president and CEO of Daré Bioscience. Daré Bioscience has one mission: to put women's health first. They aim to look at the critical gaps in women's healthcare that are often overlooked and underfunded. For those of you who tuned in to episode 1 of this podcast, you know that Sabrina and I covered a lot of topics, and she was super helpful in explaining how therapies come to market, what it takes to get FDA approval for therapies, and how do different types of therapies compare. So we had so much fun on episode 1. And if you haven't listened to that one, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. But I asked Sabrina to come back because what I also wanted to talk through a little bit was how women can get involved and why they should get involved in investing in women's health businesses. And obviously, if we want to see change happen in our country to improve women's health, we're going to have to put our money where our mouth is and actually think about how do we support those companies that are doing good work and trying to bring solutions to market. So Sabrina, welcome back.
Thank you. Always exciting to have the conversation.
I know I really very much appreciate everything that you shared last time and really helped me, even though I've been in this field for over a decade, trying to sort through all the different moving pieces that come about when we think about the bigger health ecosystem and what happens when, like I said, therapies come to market and need to go through FDA approval. But as I mentioned in the intro, I really want to talk a little bit today about why it's important to invest in women's health products and businesses, and then how do we go about it? So I'm going to start with those two questions, a little bit broad, but let's talk a little bit about, first and foremost, the environment in which women's health companies are operating and why we aren't just flooded with money to be able to do all of the great things we need to get done.
Well, there are a few challenges that we're facing. And the good news is, frankly, there's a lot of motivation to address those challenges. But part of the challenge is really structural in that it's been really only in our recent history that women were required to be included in clinical research. That's what's really led to this pattern that we see of a lot of conditions that affect only women or affect women differently or affect women predominantly, those things being underfunded and understudied. And now we're at a place where there is more science that exists, right? We can do better. And part of doing better is having the will to do that, right? Having the will to be part of the change, right? Not just talking about it, but now doing the change and doing the work so that the medicine can actually catch up with the conversation. The conversations are happening now, and now we need the medicine to catch up. And so to your question, what does that take? That does take funding, right? To do that work, that takes funding. And something that is true, not only in women's health, but in various therapeutic categories that maybe have seen an underrepresentation in science and in funding, there are really a few things that need to happen here to make that change.
Yeah.
One, more women just need to be in the room where capital decisions are being made. That's a few places, right? That is definitely, when we think about private money going in, we think venture capital. So definitely there, but also government entities that do fund making, grant making. So like the National Institutes of Health, right? ARPA-H, right? Or organizations like that, foundations like the Gates Foundation or other organization, so that those voices can be heard and there can be more push for that kind of funding to help de-risk, right? That's often really helpful funding for earlier research that goes into the space. But then we also need companies to do that work.
Yeah.
there's a whole advocacy piece of it as well, often been used very well in a number of therapeutic categories where that advocacy can also drum it up. But so if you think about companies like ours that are doing that work, we're a publicly traded company. And so if we think about just biotech in general and medicine and where medicine comes from and where products come from that have actually had the rigor, the scientific rigor, the clinical studies, the hard work that's been done to demonstrate that the products work, right? Not a consumer brand, right? But real medical innovation, that takes investment. And typically that money is coming from a lot of it from the private sector, right? The government often and foundations can fund some of that earlier work. But when you get to that later point where you're really trying to bridge that gap, it's often the private sector. But only 1% of that private healthcare investment dollar are going into organizations that are working on conditions that solely affect women. It's a little bit more if you talk about differently or differentially as well, not materially more. You only get up to 5% or so, depending on which statistic you use.
Can I stop? I just want to make sure that people hear that.
Yeah, because that's
less than 1% of all investment that go into therapeutics.
Yep.
Are that those two women only, what we're talking about, the menopause, the maternal, those kinds of things that revolve around breasts and vaginas. Less 1% are invested in that.
That's 1%. And that really is the mic drop moment. I mean, that is, think about that and think about all the work that needs to be done. Think about the conditions you just listed and how many therapeutic gaps there are in those conditions. So if we take a step back and think about what can we do about that is where anyone who cares about making sure that these therapeutic options are available, we all have a role we can play. We have a role we can play, certainly on the advocacy side, right? There's a lot we can do there to be involved, to ask questions, to demand better therapeutics. We can talk more about that, right?
Yeah.
But there's also work that we can do in terms of being owners ourselves, putting our dollars to work. And that can happen in a couple different ways. So one can be very simply in the products that we choose to purchase, right?
Yes.
I'm going to talk about investment too, but just as a very first step, it's about what do we choose to purchase? Vote with your wallet in terms of the products that you support. Ask the questions. Have they done the clinical work, right? Is it truly evidence-backed? What does that research look like? How do I know that this is a product that the company that's developed it is really invested to make sure that it is doing what it's supposed to do and it's the right choice for me? Even for prescription products, ask those questions. Part of it is voting with your wallet and supporting the products and the brands that have done the work because that matters. And then the other piece of it is looking for those opportunities to invest. We sometimes don't think of ourselves as having that ability to make change through our checkbooks, but we really can because the funding gap is real. So to address that, it's a choice that we all have to make that change. So talking about our company at Daré Bioscience and the ticker is DARE. All right, so we go by.
Is it Daré? Is it? I've been saying it wrong the whole time.
No, we go by both because it's Daré or DARE.
I thought it was like dare to be powerful.
It is. That's where the name came from. It's DARE. It's to be bold, but Daré also means to give in Italian. So it's that plan. We're giving women great healthcare options by boldly doing the work that needs to be done for them. So we go by both. But so we're a publicly traded company, and typically investing in a publicly traded company is not something that is available to the average consumer. It's typically, you can buy stock in a publicly traded company, and it's like a finance lesson, just I'll take 10 seconds. You can buy stock, right? You might have a trader and you have things in maybe your retirement fund or whatever, you can buy stock. When you do that, and that's fantastic, that money doesn't go directly to the companies unless you're participating in what's called a public offering if they're publicly traded. The public offering is where a company can say to the public, would you like to support our work and become an owner and get shares in our company? And when they're purchased as part of an offering, like that money goes to the company to do the work that the company is doing.
And does that only happen when the company first launches, or is a company able to do public offerings after they've launched?
You are able to do public offerings after so we hear about initial public offerings, right? And some of those get a lot of attention, right? Very, very big ones get a lot of attention. That's like the first time that a company is saying, and we think about this public offering, and you can't see me doing air quotes, but I'm doing air quotes because we call them public offerings, but really they're typically only available to institutions. So think about mutual funds, right? Think about hedge funds, right? Investment funds, and very high net worth individuals that can qualify as what's called an accredited investor. And then you can do those later. You can do as many of those as you want over decades of a company. But they're typically just not available to the average person. But there are mechanisms that the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the part of the government that oversees how public offerings and public companies operate, fairly recently in history of time, they determined that there should be a system where there can be a public offering that is available to anyone, right? It's a little more burdensome for a company to do that kind of an offering. There's just more hoops you have to jump through and make it available, particularly if you're a public company. But it is something that we've done as a company. So we've said it's called the Regulation A, is the rules it's under. But we look at it like, look, we want to make sure that women or anyone who cares about having these kind of products, it shouldn't be just women, by the way.
No, it's a good investment.
Who want to make sure that products that have been studied, that have been clinically validated, that they can make it into the hands of women, that they can make it to the market, that they can invest in those solutions. We wanted to create an opportunity for someone to do that. And so we've done that. It's available all year this year. It's available on our website. It's through the invest button. I always tell people, this is real. We are a biotech company. This is not a donation. You are getting stock in the company.
Yeah.
Their risk.
Yes.
Right? But you are an owner. Like you come out the other end and you're an owner. And we set it up so with as little as $250 and a credit card, someone can do that. And it's really meant to be available to anyone who wants to make a difference in this work and be able to say, like, I want these products. I'm voting with my wallet.
Yeah. But I think that's part of it too. Like when women talked with me at the National Menopause Foundation about how to get involved, how to support women's health, how to make that. I mean, part of that is why, Sabrina, I really wanted to have you back on and talking about this because, like you said, there's so many different types and categories of investing. And some women do it really well and are very involved and spend a lot of their time focused on that. But for your average consumer, like myself, there are, like you said, these things and opportunities that we can do if we just dig a little, right? So I love that you said about that, and then companies that have that, women's health companies that you know and trust, but like you said, still have to do your homework a little bit.
Yes.
And then find out ways that you can support them, whether it's like that buying stock when there's a public offering or even cultivating our portfolios in our investments, which most of us who are in the corporate world have sometimes a 401k or a 403b as we do. And there are opportunities to say to your investment house, I want to focus on women owned and targeted companies, right?
100%. And we even had someone who made an investment in this offering through their donor advised fund, right? Which we often think of those as only being able to do philanthropic, donating into a nonprofit.
Which I highly recommend, by the way, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. But some of these donor advised funds actually have mechanisms when it's mission aligned to be able to do that into a public company or even a private company and to purchase equity, which is shares in that company. So I think we all have to look at it from every angle, right? What can we be doing if we want these? If we want, again, the solutions to catch up with the conversation.
That's right.
And we want rigorously studied products, which I firmly believe we deserve. There's no reason we should be lowering the bar just because these conditions affect.
They don't make it easy, right? Like we said, so we have to do our homework. And when I think about everything that's on your plate, my plate, and every woman listening's plate, and men, it is so, again, adding one more thing, like, oh, now I got to go find these companies. Is there already perhaps somehow a clearinghouse list of companies verifiable that we can go to, or do you really have to do the homework yourself?
You really have to do the homework. And to your point, part of it takes work on the part of the company. Like for us to be able to do something like this, it took a lot of work and effort with the Securities and Exchange Commission, with where we're traded on NASDAQ. Like it takes a lot of effort. But the idea was to do exactly that, is to try to make it easy so that someone, one click, right? Just like shopping online, like one click, you can do this, make it as easy as possible. But I wish there was a clearinghouse for it. There isn't. It's a fan question.
As much as a vetted clearinghouse would be so super helpful, and maybe someone listening out there who is in this world will come up with a way to make that happen. However, I'm thinking about my friend Claude AI and Gemini and others. Choose your poison when it comes to the artificial intelligence that you're using, but talk about using it for good. You could do some easy prompts with some of these AI tools to say, help me find a list of companies with these types of variables and characteristics and give me links and you can put in all of their requirements. We could probably get a pretty decent list. Does not be vetted by any reputable source. We still have to do the homework once Claude or Gemini or whoever gives you the list. But we do have that tool at our fingertips now that we never had before. So that's one way women could potentially look for things.
I love that idea. I mean, it'll get you started, right? It'll get you started so that then you can do the work to find those solutions.
Yeah. And it just comes up so much faster. But like I said, you still have to take that list, go to your broker, do all of the things. But at least the starting point is a list of top 10 things that to even talk about or consider, which would be a great opportunity. And when we met, Sabrina, at that one of the conferences, I don't even remember which women's health and innovation conference we met at, but there was another colleague there who was a venture capitalist. And she was talking about, again, how do we get women involved? And that's part of where this idea to continue this conversation with you came from. And she said, when we think about investing, and it's not something, again, except for the last couple decades where women were really encouraged to participate in. So maybe people don't feel comfortable with it, but for those who do, and those who have some net worth, some substantial net worth, talking about what it would take to really move the needle. And the example she gave was, like you said, if there was a combined donor fund.
Yep.
And if women invested $50,000 and you can do that divided up quarterly.
Yeah.
What a huge, and I'm not going to quote because I don't remember the numbers, but she was like, what a huge difference this would make in women's health. And when she broke it down further, she's like, for those of you out there buying Birkin bags.
Exactly.
It's a Birkin bag. You could revolutionize women's health and technology by putting one Birkin bag worth of your spending into a women's health company.
Well, and think about it. I mean, that's part of also when we did this work to set up this opportunity to make an investment in Daré and Dare, we set the dollar amount at $250. Yeah. Because when we think of, and not everyone has $250, but many of us do have $250. And if you think about what we spend in a month on our hair, on our routines, on our,
my Starbucks addiction.
Yeah. I mean, we do joke our Dare to Play arousal cream is $100 for a tube and it has 10 uses. So it's like $10 a tube. Hey, don't have your Starbucks today. Have a nice little arousal session. But we don't think of ourselves that way. Right yourself today with your arousal cream instead of your Starbucks. Like it's,
But that's what I'm saying. When we think about, and certainly that's part of what at the National Menopause Foundation, we want to encourage women to do at this stage of life. Obviously, we talk a lot about educating women about their bodies and what's happening to them and what they need to do to make sure that they improve their health and they don't suffer during this stage of life. But the other aspect of it is how to thrive and how to inspire people and empower women. And so many women get to this stage of life and say, I want more purpose. I want to do things that have more purpose. And they often turn to like the National Menopause Foundation and be like, I want to do what you're doing, right? And great, I need volunteers. I need support. However, we don't talk about how if we put our money strategically into women's health, we can absolutely bring about a revolution.
Totally. 100%. We're voting with our capital, right?
That's
We're
right.
voting with our capital and we're using our capital to make the change that we want to see. And that is what it's going to take. We can't keep waiting for someone else in the room to make those decisions because it takes time, right? Change takes time.
It
But
does.
we know we've been living it. So we know what we need. We know what we want and we have power. We have, to your point, we have power in numbers. We have power. We have the ability financially to have an impact.
Well, but if we really think strategically about it and purposely about it, right? As you said, not everyone has a spare $250, but for those who do, if once a year you spend $250 investing in a women's health company or once a month or whatever it is that you
Whatever
feel
you can do.
right? And
Right.
then like really encouraging and trying to get to women of influence, women who have disposable income and tell them, wow, there's a real opportunity for you to spend that money that you have to really improve for all womankind, right? So we really want to do that. But I like knowing that there's those different levels of it. And that's what I didn't even know. I mean, I did know about, I can direct my 401k to certain companies. And we have this thing like, I want environmentally safe companies.
Exactly.
I want this kind of stuff. We all do that. We need to start doing that for women's health. So that's fun.
Exactly. And I love that example because we all do that, right? We might say, I want these companies that focus on these things or clean companies or whatever.
Yes.
You can do that for women's health. You can ask for that, right?
Yes.
It can be done.
And then, so we're going to talk about that. I love that there's companies out there like yours where for a small amount of money, you can become invested and just support the company. And like you said, it's not a donation. It is an investment and it comes with all the risk and the rewards of being part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I'd like to talk just a little bit, if you can help explain, when you're talking about what was it, like certified donor investor?
Yeah. The donor advised funds. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. No, they have to become
accredited investor.
Yes.
Yes.
What's that process like? And how do women go about learning more about that?
Yeah. So if you actually go to our website and you click the invest button and it'll kind of take you to the process, the first step is actually to share some definition of some of these terms so that we can understand some
I
of them.
will make sure that's included with this podcast.
Yeah. So what is an accredited investor? And it's basically you're making, and you self-proclaim yourself
Okay.
as an accredited investor. And it basically is about having a certain amount of assets and specifically liquid assets, right? So not just the value of your home, for instance, which is not considered a liquid asset. A liquid asset is something that could be translated cash, right? Relatively easily. So it's basically having a certain amount of liquid asset available. And it's something that's put in place. I mean, the reason that is a rule for most public offerings that don't go through all of the kind of special hurdles we did for this kind of offering that we're doing is because there's risk, right? There's risk with the investment, and it's a measure that was put in place to help make sure that people are protected who might not have the liquidity to do.
Because you don't want people, again, for the company, it can't be worried about people saying that they have investment opportunities and then they can't do it, right? So that's the thing. And I remember at one of the chief, that women's leadership organization I belong to, one of the guest speakers was the founder and CEO of Uncle Ernest Bourbon. Again, a woman-owned business, not in healthcare, but she had a great story. She's an incredible marketer. It's a unicorn company, right? It's worth $1 billion and it's founded by a Black woman. So again, really important to find these companies and support them. But she was talking about that's how she built her business with these accredited investors. And she's like, if you're an accredited investor, you can become part of my thing. And she didn't take VC funding. She didn't take big company funding. Yep. She literally did it through building a lot of these accredited investors. And so there's so much opportunity out there to do that and be involved.
Yeah.
But we have to be smart like that and apply it to women's health. So that's why I want people to think about it. You might be able and qualified to be one of those accredited investors. You just need to know to look for it and to figure out how to do that. And so I love that your website does that. And obviously, again, shout out to being able to Google and do the things we need to do to find out what those requirements are. I would imagine they might be different for different companies, right? There might be different levels.
It's actually a defined term. So I just don't want to misquote it because I don't have it open in front of me, but it's typically a certain amount of income level and then a certain amount of like assets also beyond that.
Okay. So it's the same for everybody. That makes it even easier.
Yeah, because it's a rule that comes from the Securities and Exchange Commission because it's really to protect the individual, maybe investing beyond what their means are or not under the risk in the investment.
That's true. We don't want anybody to get into trouble. We want people to we're supposed to be using money that we can afford to invest to do these things. That's a very important distinction. But again, I doubt any of us are going to make ourselves go broke because we're so invested in women's health. So let's
No, but to your point, we can all do something. So yes, that's it.
It'll be a long time before we have to worry about that category. But in the meantime, it's good that's there. So we talked about that and that you're a public traded company now. There's oftentimes too, though, startup companies that are trying to get into it and looking for investors and those kinds of stuff. Is the process, similar for private companies as it is for the publicly traded?
Yeah. So the difference is, when a company is publicly traded, there's actually more, it's kind of funny because on the one hand, there's more rules about how the investment can happen because it's available to the public. But it's also more freely tradable, right? So when you invest in a public company, you could literally buy shares today, sell them tomorrow, right? A private company doesn't have a marketplace for its shares. So someone can absolutely, if they have the right connections and they hear about private companies or they're part of one of these networks that are available that do investments in private companies, like think Portfolio, or there's some focused in women's health that are part of these, like you're putting your money in and they're making an investment in a private company. Private companies, the shares are not freely tradable, right? The only time that there's a way that those shares get money that can go back to you is when an event happens at that private company. Either they become a public company or someone acquires them.
And that's when you get your investments. That's a longer term, much riskier, sounds like, investment opportunity, but it can be very fruitful if the company does well.
Absolutely. It can be very fruitful if the company does well. And so that's why, so for Daré, for instance, for us, I mean, the reason that we became a publicly traded company, I founded the company 11 years ago. And really just a couple years in, we decided to become a publicly traded company. And there's a couple different ways, by the way, that an organization can do that. The way we think about is the thing we've heard sometimes in the news, which is an initial public offering, which is a little more grandiose. But there's also ways where a private company can merge with a publicly traded company that maybe kind of doesn't have a reason to exist anymore. And then the private company can take over. And that's what we did. It's a less grandiose way of going public, but the end result is the same. Your shares are publicly traded. We are listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. That's the place where we're listed. There's different stock exchanges. And once you're publicly traded, anyone can buy and sell your stock on the open market. And then, like I said, we recently did this public offering that's open to anyone so that anyone could participate and buy the shares directly from us. But the reason that we did that, specifically in women's health, was exactly because of the fact that there wasn't and still isn't a lot of investment from the venture capital community, from the traditional investment community into particularly therapeutic products, right? Think medicines, think things you take in women's health. And with only that 1%, let's go back to that 1% number we talked about right at the beginning. If only 1% of private investment dollars are going into companies that are working solely in women's health, if we're a private company, we're going to pretty much probably be beholden to only those kinds of investors. We're not going to be able to do much in terms of moving products forward. Whereas if we're publicly traded, anyone, right? Especially when we do anybody can be involved, right? We sometimes use the term a retail investor, which basically means you're not part of a fund, right? You're a person. You're an individual, can participate. And so that was really part of the motivation for us. Like in 2015, when I started the company, quite frankly, no one was talking about women's health. the femtech phrase hadn't even quite been coined yet at that part. And so thinking that we were going to be able to do the kind of work we're doing across contraception and menopause and sexual health and fertility as a private company, then just
weren't going to succeed. And see, there's such a catch-22 about that too. So we want all of these things to happen. But as you said, then if we don't purchase or support these companies, they're not going to succeed. And then if we don't actually allow women to have access to the therapies when they're approved, then it's not going to fail. And why would anybody invest in this? So it really is this cycle. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole about policy stuff. So I'm not going to get into that today, but I will come back and cover that on another podcast to share with our listeners about why some of the stuff that we do when it comes to policy is not just important about raising awareness or doing clinical education, both of which are hugely important and need to be done to change the landscape, but also this idea that, again, if what comes to market has so many burdens put on it to actually get it to the consumer, then it's not going to succeed. And when it doesn't succeed, then someone's going to be like, well, why would I invest in this women's health? It doesn't succeed. We have to make them succeed.
We have to make them succeed. And you just raised a really important point that I'd love to drill down on some more, which is, again, what we can do as the consumer is help ensure then that instead of supporting products that I call them like junk science, we're supporting the products that actually have the data behind them. Because of exactly what you described, how difficult it can be sometimes to get a product all the way through those rigorous clinical trials, the investment, the science, the Food and Drug Administration. So you have the evidence, right? You're not taking the shortcuts. You're doing the studies. You're demonstrating the data. That takes time and that takes money. And when it can be challenging, but yet you have a growing population of people demanding, but I want something, I want something, I want something. What's happened is that consumer brands have come in to fill the void. And also a very confusing thing that we talked about a little time, the last time we met, which is pharmacy compounded products, which are still prescription, but haven't been through any testing, haven't been through any studies. But as a consumer, it's so hard to know. So the other thing I really urge us to do to ensure that there's more investment going in to the products that we deserve is to feel emboldened to ask the questions, whether you're going through a telehealth consult, whether you're in person with your clinician, whether you're at a store, ask, read the labels, right? Has it been studied? Has it been tested? Don't be embarrassed or ashamed to ask your healthcare provider. In this day and age, be informed, ask them. I appreciate that you're prescribing this for me. Who makes it? Has it been studied? Have the data been published? How long have you been prescribing this? Oh, and if they tell you, well, it hasn't been because there's no solutions, we make it at a local pharmacy, feel emboldened to ask the question, is there an FDA approved version available?
Yes.
Right? Understand, because sometimes there is, right? And if there is, we should always be going to that first. If there isn't, then the next best thing is something that at least has been studied in clinical studies. And that means that's not a marketing study. That's not a, did you like it? Yay.
A real peer-reviewed journal, scientific.
Exactly. Scientific studied. And then if there isn't, and sometimes there isn't, then great. That's where a pharmacy compounded product that is prescription can be so beneficial because there's just not something. But ask the questions, because if the only products that are successful are the ones that are not studied whatsoever.
And we don't know what the long-term effects will be on those. We don't know, there's no regulation on the ingredients that go into those either. We don't want to do more harm than good when we talk about getting relief for women's health. You're absolutely right.
That's exactly right. And also we want to create an economic ecosystem that rewards investment in the innovation.
That's right. People who really go to the trouble of making sure this product is safe and effective and does what it says it's going to do. And I think, like you said, while I'm thrilled that we are talking more about menopause, obviously, that was the whole purpose of me starting this foundation and getting women to know what's happening to their bodies and understand it. like you said, it's exploding. And there's a lot of other people coming out there who even have credentials behind their names.
Yes, and are well-intended.
And probably use the products they're talking about themselves. That is not where your research should stop, ladies. Before you follow any influencer telling you to purchase something or do something, you still really need to do some of that research. And it can't just be read the comments or how many likes do they have. It actually takes a little bit more work. And like I said, in many cases, there's fantastic stuff that they're talking about and stuff. But I've even seen people referencing science when they're doing it. And if you've spent any time in this field, even as a layperson, I know when the study is just I mean, it's a study, but it's not really the end all be all. And same thing. I love and work with many women clinicians really doing some of that, trying to educate people about what's available and how to pay attention to studies and do all that kind of stuff. But even they get caught up in, there's so many things to talk about and do.
I have a funny anecdote. So we have a few clinicians, doctors on our team who have come from clinical practice where they practice medicine. They were your healthcare provider, right? Not yours, right? But they were a healthcare provider. They had patients. And then they decided that oftentimes they had been involved in some of our studies for our products, got to know our company and said, hey, I would love to change. Yeah, I'm at a point in my career I wanted to make a change. I'd love to come work with you and help bring more products like this to market. And what has been fascinating in that experience is it's eye-opening for us how little they know as healthcare providers about what goes into developing a new medicine, what kind of testing is really done, what the difference is between something manufactured under good manufacturing practices or at a pharmacy.
That's not taught in medical school. That's the same way that,
yeah. And how ingredients behave. A lot of times what we see, if you're looking at a website might talk about, you're looking at your supplement, right? And it'll talk about all the ingredients in the supplement. Quite frankly, that's meaningless because an ingredient might have a lot of clinical data of what it does, but unless they're talking about that specific supplement, that data or those data are meaningless because, it doesn't apply. Right. But it's been so fascinating having these doctors on our team who are brilliant specialists and had amazing clinical practices. And they're like, wow, I had no idea or how different a drug can work. Seeing in our trials when we're running them and then they get to see the data, we look at different doses, right? Different amounts of an active ingredient in something to see how is it working, right? What is the optimum amount? And for them to see, oh my gosh, how different it behaves, just two different doses, right? One can be completely effective and one not at all. Or, oh, we tweaked the formulation a tiny bit. What's been fun for them is to see, we were working on one of our products where we were tweaking the formulation and then testing and then seeing, oh my gosh, what difference, the stuff that's not the medicine, right? The stuff that's just the other stuff in it, what a difference. So I raise it to your point, it's a very specialized field and it's hard even for the people that are prescribing the products to understand.
Yes. Well, I hope we haven't exhausted our listeners by thinking about how much you have to learn and do. But I really think it's important for us to talk about these things and to give people access to this information. So if it is of interest to you, and I have so many people reaching out to me and talking to me about this kind of stuff that I know it is really of interest to a lot of people. So I do want to make sure that we're providing that information, but you kind of have to choose where you're most interested. So again, I want to get back to a couple of things, but what we were just talking about, I think it's worth even going down the path of one of my future podcasts of how does research work, right? Because that was an eye opener for me and Bone too, about how to understand a meta-analysis. And as you said, I found the same thing with my brilliant bone doctors. And so when I talked to them about, well, when do you learn as a doctor about meta-analysis and how to analyze it? And why are doctors all across the country telling people they can't take calcium supplementation because it causes heart things? But we've done the follow-up study with the American Preventive Cardiology Association to prove it doesn't. Why are they following what NBC News headline? And they're like, because you do it maybe in medical school a little bit to how to evaluate. You don't remember all of the detail 20, 30 years later. They're human too. And they are susceptible to the same headlines that we're reading and the same marketing. And so I was like, wow, maybe at some stage, clinicians should have to go through another how to understand research. Like I'm very fortunate on Bone and the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation that most of my clinicians are scientists too. They're actually the people doing the reviews on the peer-reviewed journals. So they really know. When they were explaining to me, like you said, the average clinician doesn't. And so you need to make sure that we're taking all of that into account when we're making decisions about our health. But again, here we are, Sabrina, and we're over time. And
as always,
so wonderful talking to you about this. So as I mentioned, I will make sure that several of the things we talked about will go with the notes to this episode. So if you're listening in your car, you'll have to wait till you get to a computer so you can read them, please. But I do want to be able to give people information to be able to follow up on all of the topics that we talked about today. And I'm so grateful, Sabrina, that you are willing to share your time and expertise like this. And I really appreciate it. And I'm so impressed with what you've created at Daré Biosciences. Dare to Daré. And really, I will direct people to so they can see those different investment levels that we talked about, that you talk about on your website. And I just love that there's that opportunity out there for all of us to really support the causes and the businesses and the things that we want to champion by putting our money, our capital into those things, whatever it is. Whether that is, and I'm going to make a plug for us, whether that is donating $5 to the National Menopause.
Exactly.
I can keep doing the work that I'm trying to do, or whether or not you have the 250, the 2,000, or the 250,000 to invest in women's business and women's health. Please consider that, and let's continue to keep the momentum going in improving women's health across the board. So thanks again for joining me, Sabrina. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to subscribe to The Positive Pause so you don't miss an episode, and please share it with your family and friends.